Again, everybody, my name is Otha, and I want to thank you for coming to NSI's inaugural Collaboration Stories event. We're thrilled with the interest in nonprofit collaboration. And today we had 77 organizations register for our first event. Next slide. NSI supports nonprofit resiliency through moments of transformation and transition, and believes long-term collaborations between nonprofit organizations is a crucial strategy for growth and resiliency. Next slide. Since 2013, over 20 LA-based funders have joined our pooled fund to support organizations through times of collaboration and executive transition. Next slide. We've supported over 300 organizations to establish sustained collaborations, and today you will hear from 4 of them, along with a consultant, who are crucial parts of a collaboration success. In our audience today, we have funders, nonprofit leaders, and mission sustainability organizations and professionals. We hope everybody will leave here more knowledgeable about the variety of collaboration strategies that exist and inspired to explore or support this tool for their own organization or in their own grant-making activities. Next slide. In addition to providing grant awards, NSI provides a variety of resources available to everybody, including a consultant's roster, a video library, and our newest edition, a collaborations guide, which provides an overview of collaborations, a list of the different types of collaborations, and guidance on how to get started. Next slide. We invite you to contact us if you want to learn more about NSI's grant-making, our grant-making process, or if you want to hear more about what it means to be an NSI funder and to join our pooled fund. Today, our speakers will share their collaboration stories, the unexpected challenges, and positive impacts. Please type your questions in the chat and make sure to include the name of who it's directed to. Once all the speakers are finished, we're going to then have a Q&A portion with your questions. All right, and with no further ado, on to the speakers. Our first speaker, Elida Ledesma, is the Executive Director of Alliance for Healing and Justice Network. Elida, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Otha, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this incredible panel with some amazing folks as well. Like Otha said, my name is Elida Ledesma, she, her. I'm the Executive Director of the Arts for Healing and Justice Network. I'm really excited because we really began, actually, when we started our network, we were the Arts for Incarcerated Youth Network. So some of you might know us from our previous name. And we started as a loose work group of the Violence Prevention Coalition. As you can see on the slide behind me, we had some founding member organizations, Inside Out Writers, Street Poets, Unusual Suspects, that really knew of each other's work. They were working in similar spaces. They were bumping into each other at the different probation camps and halls, but they didn't know necessarily what each other's organization was doing. And so they decided to come together really to learn, to coordinate, to share resources under the Violence Prevention Coalition. Then in 2014, that original group was given the opportunity to do a training with probation officers, field probation officers. And this was really the first project that this group worked on together collaboratively. And it was a huge success. And then in 2015, that group was also given the opportunity to do a coordinated program as part of the Children's Defense Front's Freedom Schools. And that project was to provide after-school healing-informed arts programming for system-impacted youth after the regular school day in the facilities. And so we had sort of this group rotate among the different facilities offering visual arts, music, you name it, any discipline that the young person needed or wanted. And so at the end of that pilot project, and that's actually when I joined the organization as a graduate student intern to evaluate the pilot project, we realized how successful it had been. We had really positive feedback. The young person really appreciated having a variety of arts programming that they could choose from, but also probation really appreciated having just one contact for all of the programming that was being offered. So that was actually when we tapped NSI for support to really explore the establishment of a more formal network structure. We really wanted to figure out what would be the value add of creating this network for the organizations that were providing programming inside these facilities. So through NSI support, we were able to work with a group of consultants that interviewed each of those founding organizations, really exploring what the needs were, what the gaps were, how they saw the network functioning, what would be the supports needed to really see if this was a path we wanted to take. I'll also mention that at that time, when we were having these conversations around forming the network, the county, the probation department was also sitting on millions of dollars that was earmarked for the community. Probation, because of their system, the contracting system that they were having a really hard time getting that funding out to community-based organizations. So there was also an opportunity of, can this network be a vehicle to pass through some of that funding for community-based organizations? After we went through the process with the consultants, their recommendation was that yes, there was a value to creating this formal network structure, that the members really saw that they really needed an entity that could bring folks together, that could just focus on building the capacity of these organizations holistically. So in 2016, we separated from the Violence Prevention Coalition. We became a fiscally sponsored organization under community partners. And then in 2018, we actually gained our 501c3 status. And then in 2020, we rebranded to become the Arts for Healing and Justice Network. Our founding executive director stepped down, and I took on the role of executive director in 2020. So it's been a really amazing journey. If we could go to the next slide. When we started the network, we had 6 founding organizations. We now have 15 organizations that are officially part of the network, and we're actually growing. We are looking to onboard approximately 5 more organizations in the new year. So we'll be about 20 organizations that comprise the network. Here you'll see some of our current member organizations. And as you see, they represent multiple artistic disciplines, art forms, which I think is part of the value of being part of the network, is that they're also getting to learn from other artists, different artistic disciplines, and so forth. So it's been really exciting to see how much we've grown in a relatively short period of time. I think one of the challenges that still continue for us is, how do we sustain the network and the support that we provide as a backbone entity without competing with our member organizations? We really want to be mindful of the kind of funding that AHJN goes after to make sure that it supplements, complements the work of our members, but that we are not inadvertently cannibalizing the resources of our members. So that has always been a really tough challenge around what funding opportunities can we go after? How do we differentiate the work that we are doing as a network versus the work that our members are doing as a direct service provider? And part of the process that we've adopted is being really transparent with our members around our fundraising strategy, really sharing with them what opportunities we are pursuing, having conversations around, are there potential conflicts of interest, and really trying to explore opportunities where there's a both and, so that both a member organization can get the funding they need to do their programming, but also that the network can get funding to support the collective work that we're doing as a network. We believe strongly that collaboration is one of our superpowers. If we can go to the next slide. So we love partnerships. We love working with other folks. We definitely believe that we are stronger together. And I think the network has definitely proven that over the last couple of years. given the work of our members, when we first started, the network was really built around supporting these organizations that were working within the probation department. So really coordinating services, supporting them with shared resources. But by nature of being in these spaces, the members really felt like we had a responsibility to be part of the juvenile justice movement. A lot of these organizations don't have the capacity or the staffing to support that involvement. And so they really asked the network to be in that space on behalf of all of the organizations. So we're actually partnering with the Los Angeles Youth Uprising Coalition, LAYUP. We're one of those coordinating members. And I think for us, again, is what is the value that we're bringing to these partnerships? How are we complementing the work that is happening? LAYUP is comprised of multiple organizations that are deeply rooted in activism, community justice. And so we also want to contribute the healing component, the arts component, the youth voice. So really figuring out our niche and how we're supporting the work at large. And so LAYUP is one example of our partnerships. We've also supported other regions in building their own network structures. We say that we are bringing a blueprint that other regions can adopt. And so we've worked with Ohio, New York, New Orleans, really sharing what we've learned in the process of building a network. And I think one of the things that we've learned is how important and fundamental trust is in building a network, that it really takes time for organizations to trust each other, to build that relationship that is beyond transactional, but that it actually feels that there is sort of a strong foundation for trust, knowing that we're all moving towards the same goal and the same outcomes. So that's something that we've learned and that we're imparting to some of our replication partners in other regions. But I think also what's really wonderful is that, like I shared, when the network first began, it was really around coordinating services within the juvenile detention facilities. Probation couldn't get this money out. And so what ended up happening is we created the system where, or this mechanism where probation could funnel the funds to another county department. It was a lot easier for probation to move the dollars from county to county department. And so probation was able to move that money to the Department of Arts and Culture. At that time, it was the Arts Commission. And then that commission contracted AHJN to contract with the smaller CBO to provide the programming. That model has been so successful that other county departments are now adopting similar models. So we've worked with the Department of Public Health, Department of Mental Health, and really shifting the way that county is partnering with community-based organizations and making funding, government funding, more accessible to those smaller grassroots organizations that might not be able to partner directly with the county, for example. And so it's been really great to see how what we started as a network has worked. The Department of Arts and Culture is now able to open those contracts to additional CBOs. But we're also able to advocate as a network for teaching artists pay. We're able to advocate for when there's cancellation of classes within the probation department, that artists are still getting paid for their time if it's within less than 24 hours of a cancellation. So we really see our role as like, how are we advocating for the artist, the teaching artist, and building equity so that organizations can access those government funds. And I always say that one of my favorite things is that, you know, we had some organizations that now have the capacity, have grown to the level where they can contract directly with the county, but they are still part of the network. And I think that's because of the relationships that we have built, that they see value in being with a community of other artists that are programming, that are maybe facing the same challenges, that we are really combating that scarcity mindset that sometimes exists in the nonprofit sector, but saying like we actually can accomplish more if we come together and pool our resources. So I think that's sort of the magic of AHJN, and really grateful that NSI sort of allowed us this process to experiment, to try it out, and really to see the growth of the network and how we're continuing to grow till this day. So really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elida. Really appreciate that. And once again, everybody, thank you for sending in your questions. Continue to send them in and to Elida, and we'll answer them at that portion. So next up, to talk about their merge, we have the executive director of the Center for the Pacific Asian Family, Patima Komolamit.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I don't know why my screen is a little bit blurry.
It looks good on our end.
Oh, it does? Okay, great. Well, that's all that counts. Thank you so much for having me. As Otha has said, I am the executive director for CPATH. And actually, during this time of our merger, I was not the executive director. I was actually on the other side of it, which was really working directly on basically in the trenches with the clients and actually making sure that there were aspects of the merger that were being communicated effectively to the clients that were there. So just wanted to give you some background that it's interesting for me to kind of come to this point in terms of being the executive director and really looking now at like kind of all of the background that I wasn't able to see when my predecessor, Deborah So, who was the executive director at the time of the merger and just the beginning process of it, was really doing her best to have due diligence. So in 2012, CPAF and Asian Pacific Women's Center began discussions about a potential merger. And this was in part because the organization, which is APWC, that's their acronym, they had been founded in 1993, and then they opened their confidential domestic violence shelter program in 2000. And their program is actually very similar to our transitional program. And actually, it was modeled and also guided by CPAF as well during the time of its inception, since CPAF was able to have a transitional shelter, the first transitional shelter within our organization in 1998. So there was some, sisterhood going on, a lot of just trying to make sure that we can support each other during that time. And within Asian Pacific Women's Center's, history and kind of what transpired, there was just a need to have some stability and really looking at how we can make sure that these types of services that are critical and also that are culturally specific and linguistically specific to Asian Pacific Islander survivors, that survives and thrives. And so in September 2013, CPAF and APWC entered into official negotiations to really start the formalization process of the merger. And within that time, we reached out to NSI and to make sure that we're able to get as much support as possible, because this was very new for CPAF. And I think that's one of the areas of trepidation for a lot of organizations. I do remember distinctly during one of our all staff meetings, because as staff who are working in direct service, you're not oftentimes given a lot of knowledge in terms of what's going on, like on a more agency wide scale. And so we were having this meeting, and Deborah really was very open about this process and that it's going to take a long time because this organization has been around for quite some time. And one of the questions that was asked, which I think maybe the organizations that are on this, that have RSVP'd for this call, one of the questions you ask yourself as an organization is, why? What is the benefit? And is it worth it? And what is the goal, right? Because the work that we do is already so difficult and it's so insurmountable at times in terms of the barriers. And I remember that Deborah had said that there's only a handful of organizations that provide this type of service, only a handful. And if any one of those handful of agencies cannot sustain, then that means there's less resources, less services for those survivors. And that is why we need to be looking at the goal. The goal is to make sure that we can sustain and that we can provide these services for them. So the process itself took quite a long time. So we started the conversation in 2012. And we actually didn't officially merge until 2017. So it's a long time. And I would say one of the areas that was most surprising, I think, was just how organizations are just run. It's not necessarily surprising. Maybe it's more of just, it's kind of being very reflective of how organizations run, like how much investment, board members have, how much investment staff have, taking into consideration that the work is difficult and making sure that there's enough communication on all sides. And I think that was some of the difficulty. I also think that, you have to look at programmatically, are you really in line with each other? And if you're an organization that is really coming in to kind of have another organization come under you, there are some aspects of programmatic aspects that you have to take into consideration, and you have to be able to have that dialogue. You have to be able to talk to each other about that and really be clear about your goals for the clients and for the people who are going to access services. So I think that the time wise was probably the most surprising. There were points where we started to have these where we needed to have staff meetings, and we would have updates of no updates. So there'd be like, okay, well, this is an update, but there's really no movement at this point. And that's the thing with mergers, that it does take time. You have a lot of people involved. You have a lot of community members. You also have to make sure that you're able to be responsive to the funders who are funding that organization and that are funding your organization, right? So really, that was where we found that NSI was really helpful in being able to help navigate understanding some of the strategic planning that goes around that, which is like so far beyond my comprehension still to this day. So it's just super grateful that we were able to have that support. I think also like being able to understand that when you're dealing with that kind of merger, it's one thing to do it just with a company that maybe you're selling products, maybe you've got like a particular type of service. But when you're talking about shelters, these are like folks that are there, that are housed, that are fully dependent upon that organization, and they're already vulnerable. So there is so much that we learned from that process, because we started to understand like the gravity of and the impact of all of these changes that the clients were going through too, because they didn't know us and they didn't know our organization. They didn't come to us, they came to APWC. So I think in hindsight, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm happy to say that we've fully renovated the facility, and it's thriving, and there are amazing families there, and kitties running, like little kids running around, not kittens, but I call them kitties. They are running around all over the place, and there's comprehensive case management. And so we're so thankful that that program is thriving. Would we possibly pursue other, and ironically, after we were able to be successful in that, there were other organizations that came to us, and we were like, no, not right now. We need a break. We need to kind of like breathe a little bit and be able to understand, the enormity of what we were able to accomplish, and NSI is part of that support. So thank you so much for the opportunity for me to be able to talk about that experience.
Great. Thank you so much, Patima. And once again, y'all, just please send in your questions. I know it's only, 10 minutes is not a long time for them to talk about the breadth of their mergers. So please send in the questions if you want them to expand more on it. Okay, great. So next up, to talk about their program integration, we have Gustavo Herrera, the CEO of Arts for LA. Gustavo?
Hello, everybody. Gustavo Herrera, CEO of Arts for LA. Otha, thank you so much. And Carrie, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about our Emerging Arts Leaders program integration. I'll start by just sharing a little bit of background. I want to give you some context on what we see at Arts for LA. And first of all, Arts for LA is the regional arts and culture advocacy organization We're a network of approximately 185 arts and culture organizations, over 75,000 arts advocates who are all fighting and supporting the arts. And part of what we do is really look at the ecosphere. And here's what we see in the Los Angeles County ecosphere. There are approximately, last time I checked, about 750 arts and culture nonprofits that are regularly filing 990s of 1 million and below budgets. So about 750 organizations. Here in LA County, we currently rank number 42 in arts dollars, and we are number 258 in government support for the arts. There's an extraordinary amount of arts organizations in the region, and there's very limited funding in the region too. We're trying to advocate for more, but that is our current scenario. And so back in 2021, we started conversations with an organization called the Emerging Arts Leaders of Los Angeles. Emerging Arts Leaders of LA is an organization that was founded in the year 2000. For most of its existence, it had operated as a volunteer-led and volunteer-operated organization, and its primary focus was really to provide emerging arts leaders with the skills to be able to lead in Los Angeles County. And so it was working with a lot of folks who were pretty early into their tenure of their career and trying to really build their skills. The leader of Emerging Arts Leaders reached out to me and expressed and shared that they were about to lose their anchor funder. And Carrie, we might go to that first slide if that's okay. They were about to lose their anchor funder, and this organization had largely been dependent on this anchor funder for its to cover its budget, and so it was really facing an existential crisis. The discussion was largely around, hey, is there a way for us to partner or come together for the long-term sustainability of our shared organizations? And Arts for LA, simultaneously, we were also looking for ways in which to strengthen the long-term sustainability of the organization. And we were also seeking what we had termed a regenerative solution. So part of what we were saying was, how can we ensure that we're continuing to build the next generation of arts advocates? So that's what we meant by regenerative arts solutions, was really beginning to create a new pipeline of advocates that are entering our community and becoming active in the work that we're doing. And so this is right around the time, and this was after a series of coffees. We had also done a bunch of events together, so we had that mutual trust already built and established with one another. This is when we said, well, why don't we look into a partnership opportunity, perhaps with NSI? And we reached out to Carrie and NSI, and thank goodness we're able to secure some initial funding to be able to start to explore what a longer-term partnership between the two organizations might look like. And one of the things that we did was we entered an exploratory phase, I think is what it was called, where we started to look under the hood of both organizations. And I'll just share, we worked with an incredible company called Envision Consulting. I think Allison might be online with us here, so just big shout out to Envision. They're a great, great company, great organization. They helped us look at the financials of the organization. They helped us look at the audiences. And here's a data point that I want to share with you all that was really interesting to us. And it became fundamental to our long-term partnership. The data point was around AFLA's constituency. And sorry, AFLA is short for Arts for LA. Our constituency, 96% was 26 years of age or older. And so we're again looking for a regenerative solution. Then we looked at emerging arts leaders and noticed that 2/3 of their audience was 39 years of age or younger. And so this data point stood out to us because we thought, hey, these are complementary demographics that really would in fact strengthen the organization, but also it would strengthen the field, because what we started to see is maybe there's a way for us to create a pipeline where folks enter as emerging arts leaders, and hopefully with continued engagement will continue their advocacy. And as folks are going from emerging arts leaders into the C-suites and become the CEOs and the executive directors of our arts and culture nonprofits, that advocacy is something that's ingrained into everything that they do. And so that became one of the fundamental goals of continuing to seek a partnership. Can we go to the next slide? And so I do have to shout out Melissa Flores, who I think might be in the room with us today, who is our director of programs. Want to just highlight that Melissa Flores was a former emerging arts leader board member, really involved. And through this whole process, which eventually, the process became, we started to explore the partnership, and then ultimately came to a decision that, hey, it makes sense for our organizations to come together. It turns out Emerging Arts Leaders was not its own formal 501c3. They were a fiscally sponsored organization. And so it became technically a program integration. And it was really figuring out what are the best elements of the Emerging Arts Leaders Program, what are the strengths of the Emerging Arts Leaders Program, and what are the strengths of Arts for LA and the best that we have to offer, and how can we marry those two? And that is where we ultimately landed, is integrating the Emerging Arts Leaders Program under the umbrella of Arts for LA's Activate program. And the reason I'm shouting out Melissa is Melissa was really an architect of helping collaborate with Envision Consulting, helping figure out how exactly we stitch together the Emerging Arts Leaders Program within AFLA's umbrella of programming. And because of her leadership, her vision, and the collaboration between both the board of Emerging Arts Leaders and ultimately the board of Arts for LA, we were able to complete that integration. And EAL was relaunched back in 2022 as Activate's Emerging Arts Leaders Path. And we completed our first pilot year. What I'll share with you below is a chart of the results from the first year of the program. And what we saw here is a deep jump here. You'll see the first question is, I have a deep knowledge of the LA arts field. This is someone who went through the program, or actually the entire cohort. It went from 58 to 82%. I have an established network of arts and culture professionals in the LA region. That went from 65% to 94%. And so we did see leaps in folks' understanding. It also connected them to the broader Arts for LA network, which is a broad network of 75,000 arts advocates. And finally, I'll share with you that since that program integration, our budget as an organization has also grown from what was $350,000 when we started to now a $1.7 million budget. And we secured our first six-figure funder for the Emerging Arts Leaders Program within Arts for LA, which also is a multi-year funder, which helps again with the ultimate goal, which was long-term sustainability. And so thank you for the opportunity to be able to share that with you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Gustavo. Great. And now for our Last grantee speaker from the Asian Youth Center, we have Executive Director Michelle Freridge, who's going to be presenting on a variety of collaboration strategies that they utilize through NSI.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to talk with you about my experience. The Asian Youth Center has been around for 34 years. We were founded in the San Gabriel Valley area of Los Angeles County to provide services for low-income Asian immigrant youth and families. And over the years, we have grown and expanded. We now serve almost half of LA County with services in Lancaster, Palmdale area, the Valley, East LA, and parts of South LA as well. And we serve all low-income youth and families, not just Asian. Our services are available in Mandarin, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Spanish, and English. And we provide a variety of services, including after-school programming, social services like gang intervention, reentry after incarceration, and then also community outreach and engagement. And we have an emergency food program that's quite robust since the pandemic. So I joined AYC in 2002 as the Director of Development. I was hired by the founding executive director and trained by her, and worked in development for a number of years, and then as a program director for a number of years before I became the executive director. And in 2016-ish, we had a initial NSI grant to do a merger exploration with another nonprofit organization. And that experience was so positive that I kept coming back to do it again and again. So that project was, that original merger was with Project Neo, and they were an after-school program service provider, a very small organization. And it was actually a long process, but we did end up doing an acquisition where they became a program of the Asian Youth Center. And it was a long due diligence process. 3 of their board members joined our board of directors. Their program became one of our programs, and they shut down their separate 501c3. But it was very successful. And so when other organizations approached me to see about different kinds of explorations for like back-end alignment with Family Promise of San Gabriel Valley, they were looking for support for fiscal and HR and administrative. They were willing to consider acquisition or merger, but what they really ended up needing is just support on their back end because of the lack of administrative infrastructure that they had. And so we went through a little process of exploring, and then we provided those back end services for them as a contractor for a couple of years. We also did an exploration with API Equity LA. They were looking for a fiscal sponsor, and we had not done that project before. So we did a little exploration of it, and they ended up looking at some of the organizations like Community Partners and Special Services for Groups that are more familiar with that, and they ended up going with one of those fiscal sponsorship organizations instead of with us. But it was an interesting idea to explore because there were certain community focus, certain community alignments. So when you're looking at these types of explorations, first you're looking at mission and community served, right? Then you're looking at due diligence. So you want to know fiscally how any kind of collaboration or merger or whatever the exploration is for, how it's going to affect your budget, your HR, your fundraising. And then you're going to look at values and organizational culture. And the final thing then is really about leadership and that sense of ownership. So those are kind of the 4 things that I've identified as really germane to the process of figuring out whether something is going to work or not when you're trying to create these partnerships. The final project that we worked on was with a program called the Youth Parent Leadership Development Program. And this was a program that had been a part of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, which is a different independent nonprofit organization. And it was an after school and in school and before school program that does youth leadership development with a social justice lens. And it was a really interesting and exciting project because mission-wise, it was deeply consistent with our mission. Geographic community service-wise, it fell within the communities that we serve. And values and organizational culture-wise, it actually exemplified the values that we had already identified that we wanted to move toward as an organization. So the Asian Youth Center was doing social services for youth for many, many years in partnership with law enforcement. We were doing after school programming, and in the 90s, there was an Asian gang problem in the San Gabriel Valley, and we worked with local law enforcement, probation, and did gang intervention and gang suppression and reentry after incarceration. And all of that funding was coming down through the criminal justice side of government. So we were hiring staff who were criminal justice majors. And just like in the after school programming, we're hiring people who are becoming teachers. It had that criminal justice system culture and those values. And we wanted to start moving away from that. We wanted to start moving toward a youth-centered, youth empowerment, positive youth development focus with our organizational culture and away from that kind of criminal justice focus. And this program, the Youth Parent Leadership Development Program, had that set of values deeply ingrained. So for us, it was an opportunity to bring in a program that would help us reshape our entire organizational culture. And it was a bit of a process, especially because we did this process in 2020. They joined our organization. We did the due diligence and everything ahead of time, and then they joined us. We hired their staff, we implemented, and we got going 2 weeks before the pandemic shut down. So it was a little rough the first couple of years because we had to pivot to doing these youth empowerment services digitally, and it was a little rough. But it has been hugely, hugely successful, and the values that this program brought with it has really enhanced the entire organization. And then our strengths as an organization at AYC were really about administrative process and documentation and data collection and analysis and fiscal management. We had really good administration. And this program that was looking for a new home did not have that infrastructure, right? And so that was an area where we were able to help that program develop infrastructure that would make it much more effective and scale up. And so when they joined us, they had $50,000 in funding. They had 4 full-time staff. And the year of the pandemic, they served 297 youth. In 2021, 22, 20, that school year, they served over 1,000 youth. And in the most recent school year, 22, 23, they served almost 2,000 youth. So we've been able to scale this program up. We've been able to fully fund it and expand it. And then it was also the Youth Parent Leadership Development Program is the original program that developed the Dream Centers in the high schools. And that Dream Center model has now been taken and duplicated using LA versus Hate funding and is in, I think, 25 schools now across the county. So it's been very successful, and we're very grateful for both the initial exploration funding, but then also for the integration funding, which was super helpful in following through and making sure that the acquisitions or the mergers were successful. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. Okay, and another call for questions. You can continue sending your questions in as the speakers answer them. But to kick things off, we have our first question, which I'm pretty sure is directed towards Patima, because it's about mergers. And they are asking or wondering that, since redundancy might happen if you're merging with another organization, how did y'all navigate the possibility of, having redundant roles with that between y'all and Asian Women's Center?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there was the case managers that were there. A lot of their services were very much part of our organization already. I mean, you navigate it with just checking the pulse of that staff. We were actually anticipating to bring on some of the staff that were there already. And we had these exploratory sessions. So we had to do, I think we say the word a lot, or the term due diligence. We definitely had to do that because these were people's lives. These were their jobs. They were worried about where's their paycheck going to come from and what's going to happen to them. So as much as possible, we had to talk with them and kind of let them know, like, hey, this is our organization and we're committed to these types of services, and wanting to make sure that if they had questions that they were able to ask them. But it had been such a tumultuous process, I think, for some of the staff, and whether that was just things that they were going through or just the instability they had gone through. They had an executive director there for 8 years, and then after that they had 4 executive directors interim, and so it was a lot of tumultuation. And I think by the time we kind of got to the process, they were like, I'm done, I'm out, like, I just don't want to. I want to move on. I want to go back to school, or I want to go to this organization. So we had to take all of that into consideration as we were trying to pave the way forward and make sure that there was not, animosity, and that the staff understood where we were coming from and what we wanted to do in terms of continuing the program. But it just ended up being that there were no staff that came on board.
Great, thank you. And Elida, do the structure and outcomes of the network resemble the original intent? Or did the process unfold into to reveal something totally different from the original idea? And I guess that goes for both positive and negative.
Yeah, I would think so. I think we really wanted to explore, what would be the value of creating this whole new entity, this whole new organization to support this collective group of organizations. Speaking of redundancy, we didn't want to create something that didn't necessarily need to exist if there was no value in it existing. But I think through the process of working with NSI and the consultants and seeing sort of like, actually, yes, there's a difference in the roles. We see this as a distinct organization that has its own purpose, its own mission. And I do think we've accomplished that. I think the fact that we have grown, from 6 founding members to now, over 15 speaks to the need for a network like ours to exist within the sector. But also the fact that we've able to also grow our budget, like we've been able to secure funding in terms of supporting the collective work, speaks again to the value of having this coordinating entity. So I do think that it definitely matches what we hoped it would, and that we're continuing to sort of meet the needs that were expressed by the original founding members of the network.
Great, thank you. Gustavo, so y'all already have an existing foundation of trust with the emerging arts leaders before y'all collaborated. Does this allow you to skip over certain due diligence steps to expedite the exploratory process? Or did y'all hold yourselves to a strict process despite the pre-existing relationship?
I wish. No, we definitely still had to go through the due diligence process. And we found it helpful because honestly, even though it took time and effort, we uncovered some things that I think we wouldn't have uncovered otherwise. And it's not just trust, but it's also transparency for the purposes of the board's due diligence. And so I think going through those steps were incredibly helpful.
Great. Okay, this one's for Michelle. So y'all have been through this because it was your second time around. Was there anything in particular that became easier for y'all, or any challenges that you were able to sort of proactively address?
Yeah, the process itself was definitely easier the second time around. I think the first time around, everybody had a lot of anxiety about it. And I think too, over time, there's been a change in the nonprofit sector towards moving towards collaboration and towards networking. Whereas years ago, everybody competed, right? And so people didn't share information, they didn't share funding sources, they didn't, if you were from an organization that had an organization that might serve your clients, you didn't necessarily want to share information, or there was just that scarcity mentality and competition mentality. And I think that has changed over time pretty dramatically. I think one of the other things that was significantly different was that my board leadership, although they were involved the second time around, they were much more comfortable with it. They were very uncomfortable with it in the beginning, and they felt that their due diligence had to be microscopic. And the second time around, they had more trust in the process, and they were a little more hands-off, and that made things easier and smoother, right? It took less time. I did want to address the staffing issue too, about possible redundancies, because we did look at that. We had to expand the number of board members on our board in order to accept board members from the merging organization. And we also had to make commitments to paying staff that were going to be joining us for at least a year and giving them a certain amount of notice if their positions were going to be discontinued. And that was very carefully negotiated. And we were able to hire from the other organization and sustain those folks. We have some of those folks now who have moved up in our organization and are part of our middle management and leadership as well. So it can be done successfully, but it's challenging. And there's been a number of people that didn't make the transition, obviously.
Thank you so much for jumping in with that question. I got a question for everyone, or I think it can apply for everyone, if you haven't really already covered it in your talks. But is there any were there any positive unintended sort of impacts that you weren't really planning for, but that came about anyway because of your collaborations? And anybody can just jump in if you want to answer.
I can go. I think the positive, like unexpected, because we were so focused on APWC, like our whole universe was like APWC, APWC, APWC. And I think that the positive kind of impact was on our staff, on CPAF staff, who are actually doing the direct service work. Like, they were already passionate individuals, but when they were in this process of really looking at case management and understanding what it means to possibly lose an organization and what impact that could mean for the community, the already vulnerable community of domestic violence, sexual assault survivors, it kind of fueled their passion. It allowed for them to really see like how important and critical their work was. And so I think that was really beautiful to see. And I felt like that was something that really sustained them through a lot of interesting dialogue with some not very happy clients initially. So whatever it took to kind of feed them in terms of making sure that they understood that this was greater than them. And I think that they were able to see that when they understood the gravity of the merger.
And I can jump in here too. An unexpected outcome for us was when we announced to the arts and culture community through our newsletter that we had completed this program integration. We received a lot of responses from our community, folks inquiring about what exactly this was in nonprofit sustainability. And I think for us, and I've shared this with you before, Carrie, but I think what the NSI does in our community is incredibly important. It's a toolkit. It adds to the toolkit of what non-for-profit organizations and even beyond the non-for-profit sectors can do to build longer-term sustainability. And all of the funders who are vested in this initiative, we need more funders vested in this type of work, because this is what builds long-term sustainability for the nonprofit field. And we can now message that to our community, to all of the arts and culture organizations that are a part of it, that we should be looking at this as a part of the way in which we build long-term sustainability for our organizations.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? Unexpected positive impacts?
I can share, I think for us as well, is sort of how many more opportunities came out of this network. When we started, the focus was again sort of the coordination of these organizations, providing services in a very particular defined place. And through bringing folks together, they were like, oh, we also need a shared space for young people when they come back to community. So can the network create a re-entry program that is shared? And so we ended up creating a re-entry program that is now shared among all of our network members. Same with our movement building work. And so seeing how much the network has evolved and continues to evolve to meet the needs of organizations as we grow has been really amazing. But also, I think Gustavo talked about it as well, of like how many more opportunities that has brought the network because our work has expanded so much in a very like organic way. So that's been really great for us as well.
Thank you, Elida. And I think for Michelle, I think you pretty much answered that, with the positive impacts. Yeah. Okay, great. So thank you once again to all of our speakers. Patima, I know you got to jump, but the other speakers, if you can hang around to the end, I think there's one more question we'll ask all at the end. And our next section, we're going to move up.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So now you heard from the grantee side, and we thought it was important to actually get one of a consultant side from this, somebody who's very experienced in facilitating these mergers. They're on our roster, one of our rosters are recommended consultants, and also wanted to highlight what a crucial piece of these collaborations experienced facilitators and consultants are to actually making it a successful process. Regardless of the type of collaboration, it's very useful to have them even outside of mergers. And I'm hoping, Allison will sort of spotlight on why. So I want to introduce Allison Fuller, the co-founder and managing partner for Envision Consulting.
Hi, thanks for having me. So a little bit about Envision is we've been thrilled to be working with NSI on many projects. Nice to see you, Gustavo. Thank you. And have the opportunity to speak with many organizations about potential partnerships in the last 4 years as a partner of NSI. And even as a partner of some national funders, we've helped to explore or implement over 30 different potential partnerships, working with everything from one end of the partnership spectrum, coalitions, collaborations, program affiliations, all the way to mergers and acquisitions. And we've learned a lot from that. So we've come at it from the nonprofit background. All of our team members here, former executive directors or director level at nonprofits, and know how hard transition can be. So have really taken a look at a very holistic look at how nonprofits can really be stronger together. So it's been really a formative experience getting to work with so many nonprofits and to explore these together in a very neutral setting. So beautiful part about NSI is that our involvement as a consultant is supposed to be purely additive. We're neutral to the process. We're here to provide clarity and opportunity for agreement. We don't have an agenda in trying to force partnerships or decisions that are not organic to the organizations. And so that has been helpful to organizations to really move past barriers and open up and feel comfortable having a neutral party to share their concerns and their aspirations with as we move through these processes.
Wonderful. Do you have are there any recurring themes that you found in these collaborations?
100%. So, I think, so one of the things that organizations always make the assumption about, when we talk about mergers and acquisitions, is that there's definitely a financial component to it. That is a theme. It is not the theme, but it is a theme when we're seeing some kind of financial change. So anything from revenue changes, a big funder is changing, or fund revenue opportunities is going through CalAIM. The move from DMH and CalAIM has created a lot of opportunities for that. Leadership transitions. So when a CEO retires or decides to think about succession, the conversation around partnerships naturally comes up. So that's another time where we commonly think about collaborations and mergers and acquisitions. The third time that we see a lot of it is we're doing coalition work. So organizations in the same space, independent, who see an opportunity through legislation or through some kind of payer change, and they really want to coalesce around it and formalize around that. So still kind of in the revenue vein, but also in the policy vein, to combine their efforts and put those together. Those are themes. So those are, the strategic leadership, the funding leadership, and then the capacity building, either through coalitions or partnerships, are trends. I think the assumption that it's always about, finance is misguided, because although that's certainly a component and everybody looks at it about scaling impact, it can't be the defining impact.
Cool, wonderful. Is there ever a perfect time for collaborations to take place? Can you speak on that?
So I think somebody said it earlier, it takes longer than you think it's going to take, particularly if you're working with big federal funders, county funders, even things like, community redevelopment block grants. These things take time to negotiate. So I would say the perfect time to negotiate it is when you don't have a time horizon. So one of the things that we've run into that's kind of a conflict when we think about like CEOs retiring or thinking about succession is that they really have a timeline in mind. And if you're trying to force these conversations within a 6-month window, within a 3-month window, it's just pretty unlikely. These are organic conversations where we're trying to build trust with each other, do our due diligence, allow the space to have really open conversations. And when somebody has a hard deadline, it creates this artificial, anxiety, which is just hard to overcome. So I would say the perfect time is when the organization has the time and is stable enough to consider these conversations. And even if there is a timeline where someone wants to exit, they can be flexible about it or start to think, this doesn't have to be the absolute outcome. But, as I said, the perfect timing really does come about when we're seeing leadership transition or a big major change in funding one way or the other.
And Gustavo touched on this earlier, the question touched on this earlier, because they partnered with an organization that they knew really well, but they still went through the process, and they went through the process with you. So my question here is, are there common sort of assumptions or themes or expectations that that sort of arise when you are working with two partners? And do those assumptions, create challenges for the process?
Yes. So I actually love that question was asked of Gustavo and the way that he answered, because the first thing that I'll hear on almost any exploration call that we get is, we've already figured everything out. We already know each other really well. So we hope you can get this done, in 3 or 4 months. I'm calling other consultants to try to get the right. I see these panelists laughing because it's, the assumption is, we figured everything out, and you will, in 2 years later, you will not have figured everything out. There are employees to learn, there are contracts to learn, there are cultures to learn. You just won't. So I think the assumption that you don't need to go through due diligence is one that we come up against a lot. And usually what I found is, as we go further into the process, the nonprofits who said that in the beginning tend to say, you know what, actually, now that you bring it up, maybe we haven't really looked at our participant numbers and how they might overlap. You know what, now that you bring it up, we have a 401k and they have a 403b. Do you think that matters? And so I think, those assumptions about that we figured everything out is one that comes up a lot. Also, just one of the bigger assumptions that I see is that just because organizations' missions are aligned, it doesn't mean that their ethos around risk management is aligned. And so we can both be doing social services. One organization is entirely contract funded. The other may be heavily reliant on fundraising. Just because the missions and the service delivery is the same, their tolerance for risk is different. The culture about what is a good, expense and what is a good amount of autonomy for certain executives to have is different. So, I think there's so much more to go on beyond, we've agreed we're going to keep your name, we're going to move to this location, we're going to keep your 501c3. What else is there to figure out? Is one I think we have to work through quite a bit.
Thank you. And as a reminder, everybody, you can send your questions in to Allison as well, and we will I'll add those in at the end. So I'm wondering, what Carrie and I have seen, and I'm sure you've seen as well, is sometimes these explorations they don't work out, right? They don't necessarily all end up in a merger, even if there's a necessity for them to. Do you find commonalities or any recurring themes in the processes when they don't really work out or come to an actual agreement?
Yeah, and just to be totally transparent, something around 60 or 70% of the ones that we talk to do not work out. And they come in, everybody comes in really saying, this is done. We just need you to, put the paperwork together. And that risk tolerance really is, I cannot overstate it. And both risk tolerance in terms of fundraising, but in terms of executive autonomy, boards give their executives certain different levels of autonomy, and sometimes it's very hard to reconcile. Also, funding restrictions. Sometimes the organizations that we work with they've talked to their funders about it, but when push comes to shove and we start thinking about what is money earmarked for, where do we have flexibility and where do we not, that just doesn't always work out. And then I think also we're neutral. We're here to investigate any kind of question that you've had during this process. And sometimes there are what I call the elephant questions, right? There's this elephant in the room question that we just, we haven't really gotten to it yet. And it's a really tricky time because we're trying to build a relationship, right? I'm trying to put my best face forward. You're trying to put your best face forward. We're trying to build this partnership, and we know we haven't totally figured out the name thing, but I'm confident by the end of this transition and the end of this exploration, you're going to think my name is better. Right. So I think that there's these big, elephant in the room questions that it's really difficult to bring up, and nobody wants to bring it up in the beginning, because I think the inclination is that we'll figure it out later. And when we get there, you're going to decide that I'm right. But, you know, as consultants, we're not there to crown winners and losers. We're not there to say, this is really the way you should do it. This is a facilitative process. And so being facilitative means that we prize clarity over agreement, transparency over, you know, the niceties. And so sometimes when we really get down to the nitty gritty and get down to the transparency and say, you know, this exiting a CEO would like this amount of money. This nonprofit would really like, you know, it's a deal killer not to have their name or this clause in their bylaws. You know, I think those things are things that have really ended really good faith conversations, because I think both the organizations, all these organizations were hoping that the mission considerations, the obvious alignments in funding, all of those other things would outweigh these one small issues, but they're not small issues. So I would encourage any organization that is really thinking about partnership to just put those, you know, put those elephant in the room issues out first. Because if not, we can go years down a process and come to the end and still have not answered that, or at least not agreed upon it. So those would be some things that, you know, some themes are around those questions.
Thank you so much. And you might have already just read my mind and answered, you know, this next question, the last question actually in your answer. But you know, maybe you can give some parting words of advice for organizations that are considering, you know, or maybe even in the beginning processes, you know, of a collaboration, or thinking about collaborating for a variety of catalysts, whether their executive is stepping down, or, you know, whether they are, you know, some financial constraints.
Mm-hmm. I would say that for organizations, don't be too, first of all, it's such I hope it is for all the organizations, all the projects that we've worked for. It's an enriching process, whether or not it ends up in a closure of a transaction. Through the process, you learn, we employ 80% of our strategic planning process in a merger exploration. That means you get the due diligence from a third party. You get recommendations that you wouldn't have gotten before. You get insights on the landscape that you wouldn't have gotten. And so what I would say is there's no harm to these conversations, really. Everybody usually signs an NDA in the beginning of it, right? There's the funders, you know, we don't get to a communications plan on staff and funders until a final point. So it's good to explore these possible conversations, to explore the partnerships, and also don't be too nervous about the type of the corporate entity. So we get a lot of conversations that start off saying, you know, this is a merger of equals. This is definitely going to be a merger. And then I'll get on the phone with one board member and they'll say, you know, this is really an acquisition, right? Right. I just want to be clear, like, we're calling it a merger, but it's really an acquisition. Or, you know, this is, you know, we're calling it a subsidiary, but it's really a merger. No, let's not talk about, first of all, corporate structure is determined by what you want your outcome to be. And that could be a coalition, it can be a program partnership, it could be a fiscal sponsor, it could take so many forms. So don't get stuck on it has to be this corporate structure, because it's not actually, you know, not even up to us. At the end of the day, we look for what is the least friction for your funding sources. And sometimes that looks different. But when we get too wrapped up in what you know, I don't want it to be called an acquisition. I don't want it to be called a merger. I don't want it to be called. Think about the impact first. Think about the culture fit next, and then the logistics. When we think about exploration, we think about, should we partner? Can we be stronger together? Does this work for us? It is an open-ended question. We get to implementation, that's when we're like, how will we? Right? Your program ends at 2, my program ends at 3. Okay, let's really shore up these schedules. Let's really talk about how we're going to make this work. You use Razor's Edge, I use Salesforce, right? those are how will we implementation questions. Exploration is such an additive process for every organization that's involved, hopefully. And so you'll get more out of it, even if it doesn't end up. I think, Michelle had said that it was such a good experience, she just kept going, and that's a great outcome, because being open to these kinds of partnerships ultimately, I think, makes the whole sector stronger.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Allison. That was very informative. I'm sure people were taking various notes, but no need, because we will be sending this out. This webinar is recorded, and we'll be sending this out in our follow-up. So I actually have one parting question for each of the remaining speakers, or for the remaining grantees. And that is, if there's one piece of advice that you would give to organizations that are looking to pursue a new collaboration, what would that be? And please, anyone just jump in.
I think the advice that I would give is that this is going to be a team effort. So your leadership, if you're the executive director or the CEO or the board president, is very, very important. But it also needs to be an adaptive, informed leadership where you know what your strengths are and you build a team to help you lead this exploration that has strengths that you don't have. So that and be open to alternate visions and views and opportunities, because it's not going to be the way you think it's going to be, but it might be even better, right?
Yeah, I just want to build off of what Michelle just shared. I think if you're considering collaboration, not being too specific, ensuring that the partners are open, and to Allison's point earlier too, this collaboration looks so many different ways. It can be many different things, as we all just shared. It could be program integration, it could be a strategic alliance, it could be a merger and acquisition. I think when I first started thinking about this, I thought a lot about the merger and acquisition piece of it, and that had its own set of connotations for me. And really, it was through a real thoughtful exploration that you can see, hey, there's a lot of ways in which this can help build sustainability that maybe is not what you envision coming into it. And so I think that being open piece is most important.
Yeah, definitely co-sign on what Michelle and Gustavo and Allison shared. I would just say, approach the process with curiosity. I think for us, it was just, like you said, like the question of should we, like, what does this look like? Just sort of approaching from that place, but also moving at the pace of trust. Like I said, we worked with other organizations that are exploring, and they're like, we want to get to where you are now. And it's like, it's taken us, several years to get to this point, and we're still evolving and shifting and auto-correcting. And I think there's a desire to get to the end point and to get to the objectives and to get to the finish line. But it curves, and I think we're still learning from our collaboration. So not rushing through the process, but really moving at that pace of trust with each other, I think is super important.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, speakers, so much for offering your words of wisdom and also sharing about your experience. That's going to conclude our program today. I encourage anyone who is interested in NSI and our grant making to go to www.nsifund.org. I'm also going to be sending a follow-up email with the link to this recording, and also with the collaborations guide, which is something we just made. That's an overview of how to do collaborations and how to get started, and also the variety of collaboration strategies, like 15 or more different strategies that people can actually look into. And also sharing my contact information. So if you do want to follow up and talk more directly with somebody from NSI, you can. So with that, I want to wish everybody a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you again for joining. Bye, everybody.